With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
Welcome to our first show called The Protagonists in a different format. We had a couple of weeks off, worked things out. We're going to do these every night or every morning, wherever you are. And we're going to talk about things that we think are of importance, either for world peace, economic stability, the list just goes on. Tonight and today we're talking about Donald Trump. Is Donald Trump a danger to the world, or is President Xi a greater threat? Now, we've seen bold moves by President Trump since he became president, keeping his promises to extinguish the threat of open borders and make America great again. He has halted illegal entries, disrupted and deported illegal aliens, and cracked down on violent crimes in cities such as Washington. To some international observers and libertarian supporters, some of these policies are highly discriminatory. His partnerships with big tech to collect and centralise vast amounts of data on individuals expands the surveillance state to the detriment of privacy and freedom. And then there is Trump's past and unquestioning support for Israel's merciful attacks on civilians in Gaza and the Greater Israel Project. He has now also supported for too long NATO's war effort in Ukraine, exposing Americans to unending, expensive wars. Does his bullying on the world stage, toying with the regime, change in various countries? He wants to change it. It's going to become Mr. Peace himself. Give me a Pulitzer Prize, anything. Peace Prize, anything. And his tariff wars are also creating much disdain amongst international communities. And what about President Xi, the quiet head of the sleeping giant who made his strategic moves ahead of the time, infiltrating international organisations such as the UN, which overtly works against the West, breeding dependence with Chinese investment and market access, and weaponising our own immigration and climate change policies against us. Do America and small powers such as Australia have more to fear from China and its quiet, deadly ambitions? We have a magnificent, I have to say, a magnificent group of people. Not that one though. We're going to find our three up in a second. First of all, our first guest is Colonel Grant Newsham, who's the author of the recent book, When China Attacks, A Warning to America. Now, he's a retired US Marine officer with decades of experience in the Indo-Pacific, to include serving as Reserve Head of Intelligence for Marine Forces Pacific. He was the first Marine advisor to the Japan Self-Defense Force and helped create Japan's amphibious force. Mr. Newsham is also an attorney with experience in international trade and international law. Grant, thanks for joining us.
Sure, glad to be here.
Dr. Greg Simons is a professor based in at the Department of Journalism, Media and Communication, Daffodil International University in Bangladesh. He has an expertise and qualified to talk about Russian mass media, terrorism, public diplomacy, and the relationship between politics, information, and armed conflict. He is currently working on the role of information and communication in contemporary geopolitics. Thanks for joining us, Greg. We can't. You can't hear us. We're having a great day. Greg, t- turn your microphone on. Say hello.
Yes, hi. Good to see
Good.
you again, Mike.
Uh, Fantastic. And Oliver, Professor Oliver Boyd Barrett, um, is a professor emeritus at Bowling Green University and of California State University. He acquired his PhD at the Open University, United Kingdom, a scholar of international communication with particular reference to international news agencies of all kinds and the role of propaganda in international politics. Professor Oliver Boyd Barrett, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
First of all, I just want to throw something out, just with the title itself, Grant. Which is a greater threat? And I'm sure the others will probably disagree with you here, but which is a greater threat? Is it China and its slow but steady creep, or is it the US with Trump making some fairly undisciplined at times moves? And so, which is the greater threat?
Well, the short answer, I would say, is China, or the PRC is ruled by the Chinese Communist Party.
Oliver Boyd Barrett, what do you think? Is Donald Trump a threat to world peace? I mean, we see also he's decided that he's going to he's deciding now to go testing nuclear explosions in the desert and all that sort of stuff, just so he can match what Russia and China are doing. Do we have something to fear with Donald Trump?
I think Trump is the greater threat, or Xi is a greater threat, or whether it is United States a greater threat or China a greater threat. I think those are slightly different opposites, if you will. I'm going to come down saying that I definitely think that Trump's current, or the Trump's policies and the policies of the current U.S. administration are a far greater threat overall, not just with respect to China or Taiwan, but with respect to the full panoply of U.S. the fronts that the U.S. is currently fighting in order to sustain or at least reduce the damage to the global hegemony that it has enjoyed at least since World War II.
Greg, can you tell me if what your thoughts are on President Trump or Xi? Which is a greater threat to world peace? Is it? Do you think it's President Trump with his manoeuvres within the borders of the US? I quite like in many ways. I think he's doing in my opinion, a pretty good job when it comes to the international stage. Even though he's had some success of late, I think that. President Trump is still floundering.
Well, you've got two countries at very different stages of their development in terms of global power and influence. You've got the US, which is in a state of relative decline, and Trump, he is not a reaction to the decline, he is a symptom of the decline. And you can see this how he is lashing out internationally. It's what happens when an empire goes into decline. Britain did the same thing when it deindustrialized and lost the pound as the world reserve currency, which the US took over. And now you can see this once more playing out again in a similar shade. And Trump, if we're to be diplomatic, because you know I'm very diplomatic, uh, he is not mentally up to the task. And I mean, if you look at him, he is beginning to look more and more like some kind of incarnation of Nero and the stage of imperial fall. Now, China is another creature altogether. I mean, it's mentally and in every which conceivable way is something different, and they don't plan in election cycles or according to public opinion. They plan according to decades, if not longer. And you can see the Chinese, they're very patient, unlike Trump, and they will wait things out. You can see what is happening with the construction of alternative international institutions as BRICS, SCO, and other such things. I mean, you see the Belt Road Initiative, which is their geo-economic program, which is supporting the geopolitical program, where you have the global north, which the US is the head of still, in decline, and the global south, where China is the leading economic power on the rise. So I think empires, when they go into decline, are more dangerous than ones when they're on the rise, because they tend to act with emotions and they tend to lash out because they cannot cope with managing this decline.
Grant, I see that you're taking notes there, so obviously you disagree. Would you like to illuminate your thoughts on what Greg has just said?
Well, I think that I'm not so sure it's in decline. I've heard it declared in decline many times over my life, but it always has a way of pulling back, pushing, recovering, and getting its footing again. And that's sort of the nature of the US. Certainly, one would suggest that by the apparent demand for what the United States has to offer and the flood of people who want to come live here, that there's still something very attractive about it. When Mr. Trump went to Asia recently, he was very well received in all of these places. He goes to Europe for the Ukraine talks and other things, and now people want to be around him. They want to be close to him. I think the United States does have to sort of make up for some things that it's done recently, particularly in outsourcing so much of its industry over 30 years, ironically, much of it to the People's Republic of China. That's caused huge social problems. We've, of course, have pretty contentious politics at the moment, but it's a society based on ultimately consensual rule and a free, a free economy. It does have rule of law, and it's ultimately a higher manifestation of what you would call human freedom of any country, probably that's ever existed, as imperfect as it can be. And ultimately, I would note as well that when it has an overseas presence, so you look at the overseas military presence, and point to Japan, for example, that it's entirely because people want us there. Every one of these agreements has a provision to end the relationship with the United States, the defense relationship in that case. And ultimately, nobody has asked to do that yet. The Japanese, for example, could do it anytime they want, the South Koreans, the Filipinos. So there still obviously is it's I think, economically, politically, psychologically, I think America is still by far the most important country on earth, and I say still the most decent. If you consider that in private business, how much demand there is for a product usually gives you some sense of its value, and there's still a lot of demand for the United States in terms of the People's Republic of China. It is not a consensual society at all. If it was, well, they could have an election and see what happens. But Chairman Xi has never been elected to anything. It's a place where they take organs out of live prisoners. A contract means nothing more, nothing less than Xi says it is. And ultimately, you've still got 600 million plus Chinese who live on less than $5 a day. And so it's a choice of giving a lot of people flush toilets or building a very impressive military. So as I say, I'm not at all. I think I'm not willing to write off the United States. As I've heard this before, but time will tell. But it has still got an awful lot going for us, and it is whatever support it has in the United States is ultimately has overseas, is because people want the United States to succeed, want his presence there. As for President Trump being sort of a danger, I don't see it. He obeys court orders. He doesn't spy on his opponents. He hasn't gone after them the way that he was gone after. So I don't really. To me, it's I have some family relatives who do not like President Trump, regard him as Lucifer. I don't see the evidence for that. In fact, quite the opposite.
Um, Oliver, what do you think? I can see you there sort of chewing your bit at one stage, and you're doing a grand job. You're sitting there, but I dare say you would like to add comment.
Well, I think Greg made a useful point at the beginning about these are two countries at very different stages of development, uh, at least within the industrial era, and we have seen a period, as we very well know, of astonishing Chinese economic growth in the decade leading up to its membership of the World Trade Organization in 2001, and continuing to grow at an astonishing speed for many years thereafter. Of course, naturally, that pace of growth is beginning to level off. Yes, there are some, although we have to be very careful because uh, our media system is thoroughly corrupted and polluted by propaganda games, particularly with respect to relations between the great powers. It would not surprise me at all if there are indeed some atrocities that we can find that go on in a country in a system of 1.5 billion people, 4 or 5 times more than we have in the United States. I don't have very much difficulty in finding all kinds of atrocities that go on within the United States, within its prison system, for example. And currently, we are seeing uh, a fairly steady descent, I would say, into towards a species of fascism and the breakdown of constitutional order. But I think in a way we're we're tackling the problem at the periphery, and maybe we should tackle the problem or the issues at the center or at the heart. So I'm going to propose that at the heart of this debate is what is the relationship? What is it that the United States aspires to with respect to its foreign policy? And I'm going to say that the single most important feature of US foreign policy that has been codified uh, by a number of US presidents, and so far as I am aware, is still the driving force of US foreign policy, is US hegemony. That is to say, that the US should be the dominant nation in the entire world, that the United States should not brook any competition to its dominance, whether globally or regionally. Right now, we are seeing some of this playing out in a totally unnecessary war of false pretext that the United States, through NATO, is fighting against Russia. It has already in the Middle East. It has attacked. It has supported Israel, or Israel has supported the United States. There are differing positions on that with respect in aggression against Iran, and that in China, with respect to China, where, by the way, the official U.S. foreign policy is a one China policy that was established in the meeting between Nixon and Mao in 1972. That is still the official US policy. The actual foreign policy, as opposed to the official policy, is one of turning Taiwan into another Ukraine that provides a continuing pretext for the United States in its attempt, its foolish attempt, its King Canute attempt to stop the inevitable rise of China, which is already the world's leading economy in terms of price parity. And the United States is pursuing its policy of global dominance, or trying to at least stop it withering away uh, uh, through a mixture of very aggressive military and also very aggressive, under Trump particularly, very aggressive economic policies. I have seen nothing comparable in the behavior of China in its relations with the rest of the world. I have seen nothing comparable in the case, for example, of Iran and Iranian relations with the rest of the world. So I could go on, but this is what I want to put on the table. I don't think we should ignore it. I think too many people ignore, both in mainstream and alternative policy discourses. I think too many people, way too many people, simply choose to ignore the fact that the official and the actual policy of the United States towards the rest of the world is one of US global domination. And just to clarify the point, in case there's any doubt, most intelligent people around the world resent that. And that is why the United States is a far greater threat to the world than China.
Grant, again, I can see you almost chewing the top of your desk there. If you wouldn't mind illuminating your thoughts, please.
No, it's I hear it all. At the end of the day, for a country that is such a threat to the United States, that we had, goodness, at least 12 million people come across the border during the Biden administration. That still seems to be a place that people find very attractive. For a long time, it's been sort of almost a moral imperative by Chinese people of any consequence, elites down to middle classes, to get their wealth out of China and into the United States, into Australia, into the United Kingdom, Canada, to get it as far away from China, from the Chinese Communist Party as they can. And that operates something like a futures market, where the people most benefiting from that system don't seem to have enough confidence in it, and seem to find their main enemy, as they describe it, as the more attractive place. So people do vote in that respect, in terms of which country they regard as a threat. In terms of China's economic development before they got into World Trade Organization, that I think had as much to do by not sort of bullying and starving the Chinese people and let their natural industriousness kick in. The Chinese Communist Party killed at least 50 million of their own people in peacetime and good weather, and how much of Chinese economic growth has been dependent on foreign investment, people opening their markets to China to let them earn convertible currency, giving technology to China as the price of getting into that market. I think it's cut that off for a while, then we would see just how successful this Chinese economic growth has actually been. I would note also that in terms of the US being a threat, that most Americans just want to go, they just want to be left alone, by and large. I would look at America's behavior, for example, after World War II, when it seized most of the Pacific, Central Pacific in particular, and also occupied Japan and elsewhere. The first thing they could do was they want to just get home, to leave. And there's very few powers that have ever done that. Usually, when you take territory, you keep it. I would also point out that in regards to the One China policy, what the Americans have actually said is that they acknowledge the PRC's position, but they do not accept it. But that's, I think, is a point that is worth noting. So once again, I just don't see the evidence that the United States is the global threat, and it ultimately the reaction that President Trump and also previous American presidents get when they go overseas suggests that there perhaps isn't the fear of America that has perhaps been suggested. I don't see that being the case at all. So once again, I just don't see the empirical evidence for that. In terms of Ukraine and that fight, well, the Ukrainians themselves have shown what they think of the attack on their country by the Russians, and they have fought like tigers. When most people, including unfortunately the U.S. government at the time, thought they would roll over in about 3 days or 3 weeks or so. So that's, I think, is important to remember, actually, what the Ukrainians think of what the Russians have done to them. Mr. Trump's been handed, I think, a very difficult hand, and it's always hard to take on these kind of challenges, but he's accomplished some things which nobody thought he could. The Abraham Accord during his first administration, for example, I don't think anybody thought that was even possible. So is an unconventional president. He's not like anyone they've ever had before. And it's still early days, but once again, the depiction of the United States is perhaps belied by really the way the free nations in particular regard the United States, and the way that so many people from all sorts of countries, including the People's Republic of China, are literally dying to get in to the U.S. So there are just a few observations. Thank you.
Grant, and I understand what you're saying, but I'm sure that Greg won't exactly agree with that. We see that President Trump, he is different, he is unconventional, and we have at the moment his threats in Venezuela. Surely that oversteps the bounds of what we should be doing in the international arena. Many have described Donald Trump as being a bully. Would you agree? And how do you think he's doing on the international arena? And he's done very well, so it would seem, in trade with many of the Asian countries. I'm not so sure about China, though. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, Trump, as I said, he's a symptom. He's not a reaction to the system. So, I mean, Trump is still enforcing the 3 geostrategic imperatives, which were laid out by Brzezinski in terms of imperial retention. And it's just he goes about it in a different way of achieving these things. And certainly, I mean, why is he received well in Asia? Well, they know Trump is a narcissist and he loves to be complimented. And if you want to ingratiate yourself to him, you kiss his backside. And he even said that on camera, that different world leaders are kissing his backside. So it's something he enjoys, which, I mean, all narcissists do. And I mean, to say, I mean, Japan has been occupied since 1945, but this is not the longest U.S. occupation. I mean, we can look at Puerto Rico, taken in the Spanish-American War. That is still occupied. I mean, they pay taxes, but have no representation. That sounds a very familiar ring to it in U.S. history. And if we look, countries do ask US troops to go. I mean, how long has Iraq been saying US troops stop, get out? And after putting Al Qaeda into Damascus, I mean, US troops are still occupying 30% of the country territorially, that just coincidentally where the oil is. So you get US is not a decent country, and this is why you are getting this shift towards BRICS and these other global South institutions. I mean, it's a dangerous game to play because if, as a middle or a small power, you do something that the US doesn't like, there'll be a spontaneous uprising or colour revolution and you'll get overthrown. There is a complete lack of adherence to international law. And this is clear time and time again, which is why now they call themselves the rules-based order, because rules are not law. And if we look in terms of decency, the US and the global north, especially UK and European countries, are absolutely facilitating, enabling, and complicit in genocide in Gaza. And no one is blinking about this except for the public, where the public in these countries is absolutely in opposition. And this is where this whole thing about consensus. I mean, does the American taxpayer want to fund a proxy war in Ukraine, a genocide in Gaza, over having decent roads, healthcare, the price of gas, which is going up and through the roof, the cost of living going up, the economy melting down because of this unpredictability and these constant economic warfare, which does not have a unilateral effect. And I mean, the US has, I think, surpassed its tipping point, and it's a matter of time. And I mean, who do you have which could rescue it? I don't see anyone there. And I mean, yeah, I mean, this idea, I think you will find that the statistics of people who would want to move to the US now is significantly lower than it was under Biden. And this is something which is being reported on a daily basis in world media.
Yeah, I can actually, I have to disagree with you. I probably have to disagree with you there. Although I do think at the moment Donald Trump, he is achieving some little increments of success at the moment, having that successful those meetings with various Asian countries. Just looking at trade, though, Grant, I know that you have been a critic of some of the moves that America have been doing with regards to China. What's your views on Donald Trump's? I mean, and again, look at what's happened with those Asian countries, and but I don't see a whole lot of success within U.S. relations and China.
Well, that's a tough one, and it is what comes actually of 30 years of expecting that accommodating the PRC, and for example, letting it into the World Trade Organization, giving it most favored nation status, on the belief that it would agree to do things like free up its currency, for example, abide by a number of rules, none of which it has done. That China is a formidable force, and one should never underestimate, really, I'd say, the Chinese people. Um, so he's got a problem, and I think China is not as intimidated as it was, say, during his first term. And he's got a much tougher problem to deal with, the rare earth difficulties where the Chinese have a chokehold. It's as if Mr. Trump has been handed the hot potato, because that's been building up for 30 years, and the Chinese government has cleverly gone about almost getting a vertical lock on that market on which the the U.S. and really Western advanced society, industrial nations industries have to have. On the other hand, they also have some other tools to fight back with if they choose to do it. But this is a sort of a much more complex and difficult problem than it was, say, 5, 6 years ago. And I don't envy Mr. Trump having to deal with that. I would note that because I am in the US, that actually gasoline is much cheaper now than it's ever been. Inflation is down from the 9% of the Biden era for part of that to actually manageable rates now. And the economy is actually doing pretty well. And once again, the people voting with their feet to try to get into the United States, President Trump has closed off the borders pretty effectively. So instead, we have lawful, sort of regularized immigration, and we have no shortage of those people wanting to come in every year. But when it comes to dealing with the PRC, say it's very different. You saw this in the most recent meetings with President Trump and Chairman Xi, where the Americans gave up, made concessions. The Chinese probably made fewer. One can debate who came out of that better. But back to this question of, is the United States in decline, or I just don't see it. And I think Warren Buffett, has made a lot of money, he's said don't bet against the United States. And once again, when you have that Chinese futures market, where so many Chinese people try to get their wealth out of China into a place like the United States, that gives you some sense of just how attractive a place it still is.
Oliver, would you like to add to that, please?
Yes, I've been thinking, Mike, about this issue. You seem to have concluded that Trump has been relatively, or at least has had some successes in his recent trade missions and negotiations. But successes for whom? I mean, is it really such a good idea for Japan and South Korea to agree to invest billions of their own dollars in the United States, just so that they can pressure downwards what are already very unfavorable, in my view, very unfavorable tariff rates against them? I think this is more I think this is more the style of Al Capone. I think this is a protection racket. I think it's a dangerous protection racket, because people don't like protection rackets, and after they've bought themselves a year or two of peace, then they look for another kind of Don Corleone. They look for protection somewhere else, someone who might give them a better deal, and might even look more handsome than does President Trump. I don't see this at all successful. What I see, the real bottom line here, and it's totally obvious. So let's just keep looking at it. We have two very powerful nations. Their interests at this stage of history conflict. And all we've heard from the United States in the way of policy with respect to what to do about this conflict, we've been listening for at least the past 10 years from different politicians from both sides of the House, is that sooner or later, China is going to be, if it isn't already, an existential threat to the United States, and therefore the United States has to prepare for war. And also the United States has to beef up its color revolutions, its Gen Z revolutions all around the border of China. It has to try its best to ensure that it still has the Philippines behind it. It has Indonesia behind it. It has South Korea. It has Japan. It has Bangladesh. It has and so on and so on. The primary discourse about how to deal with the China threat, and it is a threat, by the way. I'm not in any way wanting to argue that China is not a threat to the United States, or at least to the current administration of the United States. It is a threat. Equally, the United States is a threat to China. Just as in the case of Russia, we've got an issue of, well, if we're going to talk about security, whose security are we going to talk about? Are we going to just talk about our security, or do we also think about what might constitute the security interests of the opposing party? The discourse is scandalously naive and stupid right now. Instead of responding in military terms, although, of course, we should be very conscious and cognizant of the capability, the extraordinary military capability, not at this particular moment, although it's quite impressive at this particular moment, but China's capability for a vastly more powerful military than it currently has, and by the way, than anything that the United States is likely to come up with in the next. We've also already seen Russia moving light years ahead of the United States in terms of nuclear technology. So if Russia can do that with its Burevestnik and its Poseidon and its Kinjal and Siakon, well, you can bet your bottom dollar China can do that, and it can do it 10 times more. But China is not responding to the US threat to China's existential interests, is not responding to that threat with military language. Instead, it's talking about a multipolar world. It's talking about a multimodal order in which, and we've seen this just recently in the GGI initiative that is spoken about very often by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and its basic principles are respect for sovereignty, respect for countries to develop in whatever way they choose to develop, restraint from interfering in the internal affairs of other countries. China, historically, I would argue, has chosen a win-win approach where at all possible. The US model seems to be a zero-sum game, and it is a very brutal model. We've seen 50 to 60 major US interventions in other countries since World War II, and I think if we just insert a number of covert operations and regime change operations in addition to those explicit interventions, we're probably talking about hundreds. It begins very, very significantly, but it doesn't quite begin, but one of the very earliest manifestations, if you like, that the construction of how to do regime change was none other than CIA following in the coattails of British intelligence back in 1953 with the overthrow of a democratically elected leader of Iran. A historical moment of unbelievable importance, a lesson to be learned by anyone who wants to understand how mistakes can accrue more and more and more interest over time. So that now one of the trigger points to nuclear annihilation, because guys, this is what we are talking about. We are talking about a very high possibility of annihilation of the human species, precisely because of the stupid mistakes that were taken by the United States and, of course, the former imperial countries which now form the European Union, talking about, well, of course, Britain left the European Union, but I'm talking about Britain, France, Germany, all the guys who are trying to make trouble now with respect to the proxy war over Ukraine. These are the mistakes that they make. And those consequences, the consequences of those mistakes last for generations, sometimes for hundreds of years. And they don't care because so far they haven't had a China to deal with. They haven't had a modern China to deal with. And they haven't had um, a capitalist Russia to deal with either.
I've just got to, I mean, and to all three of you, because we are going to run out of time, I just, and Oliver's right though. We're going to, if there's a stoush with nuclear weapons, because they're all got the biggest and the best. And when one fires off, the others will fire off too. So it doesn't matter how big and better your weapons are. That's the end of mankind. The question is, and I have to ask Greg this one, because none of these people are stupid. That's stupid anyway. They all understand, even though they'd like to have a bit of a stoush to see who's got the biggest bomb. No one's going to win here. So, do you think if there was a conflict, it would be done? You know, still conflicts are terrible things, but at least we're not going to annihilate civilization. Greg, do you think maybe we would have a more of a cyber warfare thing, or just go back to the really big bombs on the battlefields and stuff, but no nukes? What's your thoughts?
I think it has every potential of recreating this Doctor Strangelove moment, because you just hear these Western politicians and so forth salivating at the idea of using some kind of tactical nuke on a battlefield. I mean, you had this General Donahue who stated publicly that they could take Kaliningrad Oblast militarily in a short space of time. The attitude is one of arrogance, which breeds stupidity. I always remember this Aussie digger characterization of GIs in the Pacific War. And I think this applies to what is this global North leadership now. They said that they're like a pawpaw. They're green on the outside, yellow on the inside, and give you the diarrhea. And I mean, this is what you have got. You just see the nonsense and the virtue signaling of this Belgian defense minister threatening to wipe Moscow off the face of the map. With what? With pink-haired, blue nose-ringed kind of woke ones. I mean, they don't have anything to do it. The whole premise is that they hide behind the skirt of the United States' security. They do not have the ability themselves. And I think the US now perhaps might understand that it is lagging behind in missile technology. I mean, even Iranian missile technology is really developing along, and they've really underestimated that, let alone what Russia is developing, what China is developing. The US is still playing old wars. They're a maritime and an air power. They're not a continental power, so they require other countries to throw themselves onto the sacrifice pile, like Ukraine, like what they did to Iraq 1980 to 89. They're talking about carriers and so forth. I mean, this was a bit like when the British went and sent the Prince of Wales and Repulse across the world off to the coast of Malaysia to intimidate the Japanese. The world has moved beyond this. The only problem is that there's been too much, what would you say, political capital and too much political ego for them to back down from their stupid positions, which are untenable.
Grant, your background is military, and in fact, your book, "When China Attacks: A Warning to America," and you probably would agree that if there's a stoush with a few large missiles, we're going to all end up dead because, I mean, what is it, about 20 minutes, 25 minutes before one lot's fired and the others are fired in between, that no matter who gets who first, the rest are going to follow, probably in a handbasket to hell. There really can be no winners in a nuclear stoush. Do you see war being fought differently? For example, maybe cyber war, and I saw somewhere where they could in 30 days, if they turned off the internet and a few other bits and pieces, that you would find that the US itself would suffer catastrophic losses because of all the infrastructures breaking down. So maybe war would be that, and then back to boots on the ground and a bit of the old style fighting. Because if they did do the nuke, the world is just never going to live through it, is it? It's just going to die. I mean, there's no winner.
Well, you can kill a lot of people with conventional weapons as well. Yes, nuclear weapons are
But it
bad
doesn't.
news.
It
Bad
doesn't
news.
kill the world, though. It just kills the enemy, I suppose.
You can. I think the people in Tokyo at the end, 1945, might have disagreed. But yes, you're right. The large-scale destruction of really civilian targets is something very quickly is something that nobody wants to see it. And I would note that part of the discussion here when people talk about tactical nuclear weapons is that if you don't have them, then your alternative is to, if you are intimidated or threatened, your alternative is to either do nothing or else launch thermonuclear war. So there's actually an actual practical warfighting reason for having that. But in terms of the sort of the difficulties that these weapons pose, it is immense, and not least the threat of actually using them can back a country into a position where it either gives up or actually uses its own nuclear weapons. So one really is, cannot really downplay the nastiness of these things. I would note that in terms of the previous characterization of American soldiers, well, the Japanese thought the same thing. The Germans did as well, and both of them didn't turn out very well. The United States military is still very, very powerful. It has to do some things. And then you combine some of its allies in the free nations, and it is more than it can handle itself and give anyone a bloody nose. But that characterization of that, I think empirical evidence suggests that it's, to put it mildly, misstated on that. So that needs to be 100,000 Americans died in the Pacific, and they did most of the fighting. So that needs to be, I think it needs to be mentioned. And I would also note that, just going back a little ways, that the Chinese have threatened to drop 100 nuclear weapons on Japan if they make a move regarding Taiwan. So their saber rattling is immense. Wang Yi has said that he's glad to have the Ukraine war continue. And with all of that bloodiness going on, the South China Sea, if you were to ask the claimant states that around the South China Sea what they think of Chinese assertive behavior, they give you a pretty clear answer on that. And in terms of China's the PRC's actual military capabilities at the moment, they really can't project power very far beyond maybe 1,000 miles beyond the Chinese mainland. But their objective is global, and they're making steady progress in that. But they know what they face from the United States and the free nations as well. But back to what you said about cyber warfare, for example, you said it'd take 30 days to cause us immense trouble. I think it's probably a lot less than that. But the nature of war hasn't changed in a certain sense, but the methods, the tools are different, and cyber is certainly one. And the book I wrote, it actually talks about when China attacks. And my point is that the kinetic war, the shooting war, is just the last step, if it's even necessary. And things like cyber warfare, economic warfare, financial warfare, proxy warfare, psychological warfare, and drug warfare, chemical warfare. The fentanyl attack on the United States since about 2013 has killed well over 500,000 Americans. Well, it all comes from China. China could stop it if it wanted to. So this is very much unrestricted warfare, as the PRC actually talks about it. This is we're headed for trouble, unfortunately, and we do face some real threats, and they need to be dealt with. And I think U.S., in however imperfect a way it goes about these things, is doing what is necessary. Sometimes you wish they would do things differently or do it faster, but the threat is finally understood.
Yeah. We're running out of time. Got all sorts of noises and everything. Sounds like it's a it sounds like it's a day on the battlefield. Just as we run out of time, I just want to get if you wouldn't mind, just probably a 60-second summary of your thoughts on whether Donald Trump is a greater threat to Xi, or whether they're both both could be held accountable to being a little vicious. And the future, do we see a global stoush, or is it still going to be this posturing? My bomb is bigger than your bomb. Oliver, if you could just start the process, please.
Yes, I think, strangely enough, perhaps, we're ending this program on a note of convergence. At least I hope so. I think we all recognize that nuclear stashes are a problem. And therefore, if our leaders are serious about improving the human condition, one of the first things that they will do is to reinvigorate or start talking again about nuclear security. Uh, I blame the United States primarily for the breakdown of the regulatory order that we had to protect ourselves against the worst excesses of nuclear weapons. I recognize the world has become a great deal more complicated with the entry into the game of China, particularly, but also the status as nuclear possessing countries such as India and Pakistan, and of course Israel, whose nuclear power, unacknowledged, of course, officially by the United States, plays enormous mischief across the Middle East. But the time has surely come. Instead of President Trump, responding to the latest information from Putin with respect to Russia's development of the Poseidon torpedo weapon, nuclear powered, or let's note, micronuclear reactor powered torpedo. Instead of simply responding with a silly insistence to the Pentagon that now is the time to start testing again. I mean, what absolute rubbish and absolute poverty and bankruptcy of thought does that represent, gentlemen? I think we have to find some way to the reinvigoration of adult conversations about how to stop this menace.
Great. Your turn now, just to wrap this up, to tell us your thoughts, whether we're going to end up in a microwave or whether the world is going to be a safer place. And just quickly, your thoughts on whether it would be the conventional war, the nuclear war, or cyber warfare. What do you see, just quickly?
It's going to be a mixture of things. Well, you can see, I mean, Grant made the comment earlier that people want to put their financial wealth with the US and the West. I mean, that's utterly insane considering how much national wealth they steal from other countries on the flimsiest pretense. So economic warfare is a definite one. But I mean, if you look at Xi and Trump, you've got two different approaches to decision making. Chinese is quite a logical, long-term, rational logic. Um, and what we see with Trump, it depends on what side of the bed he gets out in the morning. It's emotional, and then it's caps lock on his Truth Social in the middle of the night. I mean, it reminds me of this Turkish proverb: if you put a clown in the palace, it does not make him a king; it makes the palace a circus. And that's what current stage I see the West at. So I think this is the more unpredictable one. And you can see that Trump is really wanting to go after Venezuela uh, for drug trafficking and perhaps the largest reserves of oil. And so this unpredictability, which is something the Chinese have an aversion to. They don't like unpredictability. So you've got these two different approaches. I see the West as the biggest problem in the US, and this is driven by its decline.
And Grant Newsham, you have the final word. What's your thoughts? And is Donald Trump a clown?
Well, he does get into people's heads pretty well. And that expression, Trump derangement syndrome, it really applies to every Republican president, probably going back to Nixon. He does. So he gets people wrapped around the axle. He is, in terms of being a threat, as I said, I don't see it. I think he was elected in both a primary and an actual federal election at least twice. He follows court orders. He may not like them, but he follows them. He has not gone after his opponents. He didn't go after Hillary Clinton, hasn't gone after Joseph Biden, and the way that his opposition went after him. He doesn't like using force overseas, and some would even say he's been sort of too soft in using it, but he is willing to use it. And a good chunk of the American population does support what he does. I would note that the idea that somehow could be miscalculations, wars come about accidentally, I would suggest that actually wars come about because one side actually wants to do it and thinks it can get away with it. So that is something that I would point out. The need to, I think if modern history has told us anything, it's that when the free nations get together to defend themselves, that it tends to have a stabilizing effect on it. But and I would, as a last note, I would suggest, I would just really ask Xi Jinping to hold an election. Let the Chinese people themselves decide how and who they want to run them. I think Jackie Chan said that Chinese people can only be governed by a boot on the neck, or something along those lines. Well, that's something that the old Afrikaners used to say about Black Africans, and it was wrong. So there's no reason that the PRC couldn't have, as I say, have an election, choose how they're governed. They can handle it. Taiwan, 90 miles across the straits, shows that Chinese people can indeed handle the sorts of freedoms that most people aspire to. But I think I'm not so optimistic about where this all is heading. But that's, we're not the first people in human history to have to deal with this. So thank you.
Thank you very much, especially the start of it. We had a few technical issues, but first program, we're all forgiven. I've got to thank you very much, Colonel Grant Newsham, retired US Marine officer and author of When China Attacks, a Warning to America. Dr. Greg Simons, geopolitical commentator and expert in media and communications, and our very dear friend, Professor Oliver Boyd Barrett, Emeritus Professor at California State University. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure on our first show. This is the Protagonist. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same channel. Hopefully we'll start even better with less headaches. Nice to be with you. This is The World Today.